The Chessboard Killer. In the heart of Moscow lies Bitsevsky Park. A sprawling forest where the trees grow thick, and silence falls heavy after dark. For decades, it was a place for families, joggers, and children playing among the pathways. But for nearly 15 years, it was also something else, a hunting ground. A place where laughter turned into screams, and where one man believed he was playing a deadly game of chess. His name was Alexander Pichushkin. Childhood and the seed of violence. Alexander Yuryevich Pichushkin was born on April 9, 1974, in Moscow. His early childhood was unremarkable, almost ordinary. He was a small boy growing up in the Soviet Union, where life was gray, predictable, and filled with the routines of school, family, and neighbors. But even in ordinary lives, shadows can form. For Alexander, the turning point came when he was still very young. He fell from a swing, striking his head hard against metal and concrete. The injury caused permanent damage to the frontal lobe of his brain, the part that controls impulses, emotions, and social behavior. After that accident, those who knew him began to notice a change. The boy who had once been lively grew restless, aggressive, unpredictable. He would lash out, sometimes violently, sometimes without warning. At school, he became a target. Children mocked his odd behavior, bullied him for being different. They called him slow, stupid, strange. And Alexander retreated into himself. But one man saw something in him that others did not, his grandfather. An intelligent, disciplined figure who took the boy under his wing. He introduced Alexander to chess, the game of kings. At the board, Alexander found a new world. A world where he was in control. Pawns and knights obeyed him. Bishops and rooks sacrificed themselves at his command. Chess gave him something reality had stolen, power. He became obsessed with the game. Hours would vanish as he studied moves, strategies, combinations. In those moments, he was no longer the bullied boy. He was the master of an entire universe. But chess did more than soothe him. It planted an idea. A structure. A framework for control, dominance, and death. The first killing. By the early 1990s, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and Russia was plunging into chaos. Crime exploded, the police were overwhelmed, and violence spilled onto the streets. In this environment, Alexander Pichushkin took his first step into darkness. He was still a teenager when he lured a childhood friend into Bitsevsky Park. The boy thought they were going to drink vodka together. Instead, Alexander struck him with a hammer and pushed his lifeless body into a sewer pit. Why? Pichushkin would later explain, when you kill, you want to live even more. This was not rage. This was not revenge. This was experimentation. He was tasting death, feeling the rush of absolute power. And he liked it. The game begins. But after his first murder, Pichushkin did not stop. He began to stalk Bitsevsky Park like a predator. His method was simple, almost casual. He would approach strangers, often elderly men, sometimes homeless, sometimes lonely, and offer them vodka. "Let's have a drink together," he'd say. Russians are social drinkers, and many accepted. Together they would walk into the forest, bottle in hand. But once inside, the game changed. Alexander carried a hammer hidden in his bag. At just the right moment, he would swing it with brutal force, crushing his victim's skull. Then he would drop the body into one of the park's sewer wells, dark, bottomless holes where corpses would sink into silence. For years, these deaths went unnoticed. In 1990s Moscow, men often vanished. Some drank themselves to death. Some were robbed, stabbed, or beaten in random fights. A missing homeless man was hardly news. And Pichushkin knew this. September 27, 2025, 1:22. He counted on it. But for him, murder was never random. Each victim was a move. Each strike of the hammer was another step toward a larger goal. He wasn't just killing. He was playing chess. The chessboard. At some point during his killing spree, Pichushkin revealed his plan. He told investigators after his capture, "A chessboard has 64 squares. I wanted to kill 64 people. To fill the board." For him, murder was a game of strategy. Each victim was not just a person, but a piece. Each death advanced him toward his ultimate victory. But unlike chess, his victims had no defense. They didn't even know they were playing. Escalation. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, the murders continued. Pichushkin became bolder, more violent. He experimented with new methods: strangulation, drowning, even inserting vodka bottles into his victims' skulls after they were dead. He began targeting not just strangers but acquaintances. Neighbors. Co-workers. People who trusted him. One of his victims was even a woman he had dated briefly. She had turned down his advances. For that, he took her into the forest, and she never returned. Each killing made him more confident. Each time, he felt untouchable. And for years, he was. The investigation. By the early 2000s, bodies were being discovered in Bitsevsky Park at an alarming rate. Old men, women, teenagers. Some beaten, some drowned. The press began to whisper about a serial killer. Locals called him the maniac of Bitsevsky Park. But the police struggled. Russia was still plagued by corruption and inefficiency. Evidence was overlooked, cases went cold. And Pichushkin was careful. He varied his methods, changed his approaches, and often chose victims who would not be missed quickly. For years, he stayed one step ahead. The mistake. But every predator makes a mistake. In 2006, Pichushkin lured a young woman named Marina Moskolyova into the park. She was smart, independent, and, most importantly, she had told her family where she was going, and with whom. Before leaving, Marina wrote a note with Alexander's phone number. When she didn't return, her family gave it to the police. It was the thread investigators had been waiting for. They traced the number. They followed the trail. And soon, Alexander Pichushkin was under surveillance. The arrest. When police finally arrested him, they expected a nervous, broken man. But what they found was something else entirely. Pichushkin was calm. Almost proud. In custody, he confessed almost immediately. But not just to a few murders. He began listing names, dates, details, far beyond what police had suspected. He claimed to have killed 63 people. Investigators were stunned. They could confirm at least 49 murders. That number alone made him one of the most prolific serial killers in Russian history. But Pichushkin insisted it was more. "I would have been the world's #1 killer," he said. "If they hadn't caught me." The trial. In 2007, Alexander Pichushkin went on trial. The courtroom was packed. Survivors' families, journalists, and curious onlookers filled the seats. When the judge asked if he pleaded guilty, Pichushkin replied, "In part." He wanted recognition for the full number, all 63 murders, not just the 49 proven in court. The trial was chilling. Evidence of his brutality shocked even hardened investigators. Photos of crime scenes. Descriptions of how he lured victims, how he struck them, how he disposed of their bodies. But perhaps the most disturbing thing was Pichushkin himself. He showed no remorse. No shame. At times, he even smiled. He told the court, "For me, life without killing is like life without food." Sentencing. In October 2007, the court found Alexander Pichushkin guilty of 49 murders and 3 attempted murders. The sentence, life in prison. But even here, the judge added something special. For the first 15 years of his sentence, Pichushkin would be kept in solitary confinement. September 27, 2025, 1:22. A cell no larger than a bathroom, with only the barest necessities. It was the closest the Russian justice system could come to a living death. Legacy. Today, Alexander Pichushkin sits in prison, serving his sentence. He is 51 years old, still alive, still unrepentant. He once said that had he not been caught, he would never have stopped. That he wanted to fill his chessboard completely, all 64 squares soaked in blood. He nearly succeeded. The chessboard killer remains one of the darkest figures in Russia's criminal history. A man who turned a childhood game into a framework for mass murder. And his hunting ground, Bitsevsky Park, still stands in Moscow today. Families still walk its paths. Children still play beneath its trees. But for those who know its history, the silence there feels heavier. The shadows deeper. And the question lingers, how many ghosts remain beneath its soil? In chess, the goal is checkmate. For Alexander Pichushkin, the goal was death. And in the end, it wasn't a pawn or a queen that stopped him, but his own arrogance. The killer who thought he could outplay the world was finally cornered. And the game was over.